So I just launched this. If you're coming from my Instagram, you know that I'm just about to do a soft opening after the winter holiday in 2020. But I wanted to show a little bit of the process of what I'm doing because I've had people asking. So what I'm doing here, you see me, I am tensioning my warp, which are the vertical threads on my loom. So I was just adjusting the tension of one of the bundles that felt a little loose, and now I'm going to be spreading out my warp so that I have an even surface to weave on. I'm using here an Ashford loom. This is a 24-inch loom, and I'm using the cardboard sticks here that come with it as some of my spreaders. You'll see in a minute, I didn't think that this was enough to even them out, but I wanted to use these first because I like having something flat to beat onto when I do start beating. Now I'm grabbing, this is just some regular craft paper. I know some people use recycled paper bags. I just happen to have a giant roll of craft paper that is the right width for my weaving. So I'm putting that under here, and what this is going to do is actually serve as kind of a buffer between the layers that'll keep our freshly woven fabric spread apart while it's still on the loom so that we don't get any odd snags or anything like that. In here I'm getting together some waste yarn because, like I said, I didn't think that my cardboard spacers gave me enough of a spread on that warp yarn, so I'm going to go through now with just some waste yarn. This is from my last project, which I'll put in like a little picture of here, and I just wanted to use up some of that yarn so it doesn't go to waste, so I'm using it here as some spacer yarn, again trying to spread out that warp. So for my spacing, I like to do 3 passes, and I usually start in the down shed, then go up and back to down, and I do them all without beating. And then once I get them all in, you'll see after this final pass here, if I can actually get it through the warp, I am going to beat, and that'll really spread out the yarn. So now you see we have a nice even playing field to start with. Much better than it was from those little bundles at the bottom, and I'm ready to start weaving. So I am using some of the same yarns as the warp as my weft. The weft are the horizontal yarns that you're going to see me weaving here, and to start off I'm actually pulling off about 4 or 5 lengths of that weft yarn that I'm going to save because I am going to be doing a hem stitch. I think it looks really nice at the end, and I don't have to worry so much about doing a ton of knots at the end. I know some people love doing the knots. It is kind of a nice way to finish, but I really like hem stitching. I feel like it holds everything together. So now we're just getting into the plain weaving. This is just a tabby weave, so just 1 through in the up shed and then back through in the down shed, and that is 1 weaving cycle. Each time you go through is called a pick, just so you know if I start talking in weaving language. Each time you see my shuttle, which is what's holding the yarn, go through, I am doing 1 pick of the weft yarn. And now you see after 2 picks of one color, I'm switching to a darker color, and this is how I'm going to get my pattern. So this is actually a houndstooth pattern, but I am not weaving it in solid colors. I had an idea pop into my head. I was like, oh, I really want to do a deconstructed houndstooth. Like, how would it look if I used striped yarns or speckled yarns for houndstooth? So this is kind of where this project came to my mind. I was thinking, you know, from far away, you can get a little bit of that houndstooth look, but from up close, it'll be a little bit more mysterious, a little bit more of a heathered fabric look, rather than so much of a, you know, classic houndstooth. So this is kind of real time what it looks like when I'm starting off a weave. I wanted you all to see it in regular time, and it does get a lot faster. This is just the very beginning, so it's kind of slow going because you're trying to get everything into place. You saw me there tucking in the tail end to make sure that when I do finish this, that tail will just disappear and I'll trim off the excess that comes out the back. So you can see after I did a few rows, here I'm showing you what I'm doing when I go into hemstitch. I usually hemstitch in groups of 3 or 4, but for this, because it was a houndstooth, I wanted to hemstitch in groups of 2. And so what I'm doing is I go over 2 and then up 2 and come out there. And then I go right back down to where I started and I go just over 2. So I'm really not a weaving teacher. There are a lot of really great weavers out there who do teach classes online. One person who I like to go to her blog for reference and who also does videos, I believe, is Kelly Casanova, and they can explain this in much greater detail if you're interested in starting weaving. But basically what we're doing is making little bundles. Okay, and now I can really get into the weaving. So you can see this is sped up. So you can see what I'm doing there. I'm just advancing the warp so that I have more space to work, and as I advance the warp, my new fabric winds on to the bar down at the bottom, and that's where it goes until I am done weaving, where I pull it all off and it gets off of tension. You can see with this yarn I'm weaving with a fairly open beat. It's very loose, and that is because I'm using bulky yarns. All of my yarns are bulky, and I'm using them on a 7.5 dent heddle, which is usually used for worsted weight. But I wanted to use it for this yarn specifically because it is a bulky that is only rated as a 5. It's a knitting yarn, but I wanted to see how it would do for weaving. So here I'm just showing a little bit, because I'm using 2 shuttles. This was a new project for me, so what I'm doing here is showing you I actually have to cross the shuttles to try to get kind of a climbing self edge on the right side. Otherwise you would get an uneven self edge, so every time I'm doing these, it's a little bit of shuttle management, coming through one side and back out the other and crossing shuttles to make sure that I have this nice clean edge over here and that I'm grabbing that yarn from the previous down shed when I start the new up shed with the new color. And it's surprisingly rhythmic when you get into the feel of this weaving. It's very, very relaxing for me in that way. I'm a musician by trade, and so rhythm is really easy for me. Here I'm going probably at, I don't know, a quarter of the speed of what I'm normally weaving at, just to show you all what I was doing, because it is really important for a nice houndstooth that you go through and you keep the self edge really straight, especially when you're weaving this open. Otherwise you'll end up with tons and tons and tons of loops on your self edge instead of having a nice even self edge. There are a few spots you'll see probably at the end when I finished it where it's a little bit questionable, and I was probably not paying enough attention at that point. So again, here's a close-up of what I'm doing here. There are some really great videos out there on how to do houndstooth. But here you can see I have the previous yarn, which is the lighter yarn, coming out on top, and then I have the darker yarn down on the bottom. So here I'm going to go through with my darker yarn just off the screen. And when I do pull that tight, you can see that that is a loop that is on top of the previous yarn, and that's how I'm creating that self edge. And that's how you get this nice kind of twisting, crawling self edge that goes up. And then one more time, going up with the other side. Here I go with my self edge. and it's grabbing that previous yarn in a loop, creating a nice flat selvage that just twists up the side of the work. Also, forgive me for my camera work. I'm working, so having a 24-inch loom and trying to work with a camera, I literally have my camera suspended on a boom arm over me while I'm trying to weave, but the platform that the boom is on is to my left, so I'm trying not to hit it with my shuttles. So it made this project a little more difficult than it probably should have been, just for trying to avoid the camera, but I really wanted to show what I was doing because I've had so many people asking me, like, what on earth is this thing that I'm working on? So I kind of got into looms a while back. I've always been a fiber arts, yarn arts kind of person. Growing up, I started knitting and crocheting actually when I used to do musical theater, and we would have long waits between rehearsals when we were waiting to do scenes. And so I learned how to knit actually from one of the other players, and she just taught me in the lobby, and from there I've been doing it for years. I started crocheting a lot more than knitting after that, and then I've just done it my whole life that I can remember since then. I really got back into yarn arts when I worked at a private boarding school for the arts. I was lucky enough, they had a small kind of middle semester called intermester, where anyone could teach a course, and I was lucky enough that one of my coworkers invited me to co-teach a course on yarn arts. During that course, I was working on crocheting. We had students who were both crocheting and knitting, and I was also at that point starting to spin my own yarn, and I was also starting to weave. I just got my first loom. I was living in a very nice area where I could get to lots of local yarn shops. And so I felt very fortunate that I could get my first loom, and I also had my first spindle at that point. So that's kind of when I got into weaving, and then I fell off a little bit. Just because life happens, I got really busy, I changed jobs, and I was working constantly. And so I didn't really keep doing the loom so much just because it's like, oh, I have to go get out this big wooden thing. And at that point I was working on a frame loom, so it's really not a big wooden thing as much as this is. But it just felt like it was more of a chore to get everything ready. Whereas with this now, even though it is a lot to get ready, it probably takes me 2.5 hours to set this up when it comes to warping and then tensioning the warp and tying on my knots and getting everything ready. It feels much more methodical now, and so it's kind of become self-care for me. I picked it up this year in 2020 because of the pandemic and trying to find something to do in my downtime when I was first furloughed, and then I tried to find a new job, and it just isn't working out for me with the pandemic, which is fine. There are many people who are worse off than me. I'm very lucky that I have somewhere to be. I'm very lucky that I have the means to get these supplies and people who are supporting me, so I'm very grateful for that. And I'm grateful for this because it keeps me busy. It's like, it's self-care, but it's also creating something beautiful and tangible at the end of that self-care, which is the same reason why I bake a lot, and the same reason that I like to work with paper goods, because I'm creating something that in the end I have something to show for the self-care that I've done, which is for me dually rewarding. So here I'm just showing some yarn I get in my moment. I was taking a break from weaving because sometimes weaving for hours at a time can really hurt your back. So I was like, you know what, let me take a break. Let me play with this yarn for a minute. And I did. And I really enjoyed it. And I think that it came out with some fun shots, playing under tension. Here you can really see that striping pattern for Houndstooth. It's really easy. It's just 2 of each color, and it's alternating. You see that I do have 1 stripe of 4 in the middle, and then I have my side stripe. Really just because I wanted to make sure I had enough yarn to actually get some Houndstooth out of this pattern. And again, this is a bulky yarn, but working on a 7.5 dent heddle, and a US Heddle is probably closer to an 1/8 end, but this is an Ashford loom from New Zealand. And again, this one was really just a project for myself. It was more of a, can I do this? What will this look like if I make Houndstooth but without solid colors? What happens if I weave with a bulky yarn as my warp and my weft under tension on this heddle? How far apart should I be spacing my picks of my weft on this heddle? So it really was kind of like a clinic for me, trying to figure out what I was doing. Here you can see I'm getting really close to the end, which is why that last pick was really hard. My sheds are very close together, and because I wound on and warped with only tying onto the back bar once, my back bar is very messy right here, because I was like, I'm just going to get it done. I don't want to tie knots. Probably about 4 knots is what I used to start this weaving. And here I am at the other end. I'm going through and I'm gonna get ready just to tie it off so that I am able to take it off the loom. I'm gonna do the same thing that I did at the first side, but I'm doing a hem stitch this time with both my weft yarns, so the lighter yarn that you see here, and then I'm gonna go through and do the same with this darker yarn. And that's how I'm going to be able to create a nice, very nice finished edge at the end here. I actually ended up liking this edge better, and I probably should have done this at the beginning as well. By using both yarns, I got a really kind of bulky and beautiful finished hem stitch. I thought it was so stunning having the two of them intertwined there. Okay, and now I am back to my same thing. So I go over 2, and then I go down 2, come up and pull through, and then I'm gonna go right back over to where I started and just go over 2, and then I'm gonna pull through that loop that I just created. And that's how I'm making my little knot that is going to hold everything in place, especially once I wet finish everything and the wool fibers do full. It's going to be a very secure way to finish this off. So I'm just going to keep going across there. There's one more time. Hopefully you can see I'm going over 2 and down 2. Then I'm going back in where I started and just over 2 and through the loop. And that creates a little knot that holds everything in place. Nice little package. Cool. Here I was doing high speed, and you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I'm grabbing those weft yarns, and you can see they're going from those 2 spread out yarns, and they're being pulled together into that one yarn, and that's what's really securing the warp yarns. Having those 2 weft yarns come so close together and then tying them in a knot with the hem stitch. So here's the fabric just off the loom. You can see already it's kind of started to rebound a bit, which is giving us some nice kind of glimpses of that heathered, deconstructed houndstooth that I was going for. And this is before I've even finished it. This is literally just the loom as soon as I've cut it off the loom. So, and it's so soft, you all. I can't explain. Because this is a knitting yarn, it doesn't have the lanolin still in. There's none of the natural oils are still in the wool fiber. So it's already very soft. And so it's so nice to do that. Here I am going in for my finishing wash. So I wash in very hot but not boiling water. You can see I can submerge my hand in it. And then I'm using just a mix of Castile soap with lavender oil. And I am going to submerge this, and I'm going to just barely knead it. And that's because I did weave this with a fairly wide DPI and EPI. So I'm going to knead it just a little bit because I want the wool fibers to kind of grab onto each other. Not necessarily felting, but I want them to really, grab each other and pull the fabric together. You can see already, just those few seconds, by kneading it, just how much the fabric has come together. Those holes are like almost gone immediately. You can start to see some of the houndstooth a little bit more. And what I'm gonna do is a method where I've put this in some very hot water and it's in a tub. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave it here for about an hour and allow the tub to cool down a bit. Once that hour is up, I'm going to figure out what temperature the water is. I'm gonna match my rinsing water to that same temperature so that I don't shock the wool fibers, and I'm gonna rinse it. So here it is, fresh out of the water. I've just rinsed it. I did 2 rinses just to make sure that I got all of the excess oils and soap out. And you can kind of see that it's starting to look like houndstooth. Here the next day, it's fully dry and it is complete cloth now. You can see it really came together. You can see that nice hem stitch there at the end. And I'm very happy with how this came out. It was really kind of a, can I do this? What's it gonna look like if I decide to do this in the future? So I'm very happy with how it came out. Here's just another look at the fabric, fresh off the loom. If I wove this probably with yarn, I don't know, a quarter of the size of what I used, you could make this into a really nice menswear fabric. That's another really great thing about these looms. Because mine is 24 inches, I can actually make some really nice panels, and if I wanted to use them to make some garments later on. And now it's time to warp up for the next thing, which you see me doing here. I'm already on to the next project, so. Please leave any questions you might have in the comments below. I've linked my new Instagram. I am planning to launch my Etsy shop later this month, and I will be selling drops monthly after that. Alright, thanks so much for watching. Please do leave a like, subscribe if you're interested, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.